The year was 1944. The world was still burning. Across oceans and continents, the Second World War had swallowed millions of lives and dreams. But far away from the battlefronts of Europe, beneath the scorching sun of Texas, a quiet and unexpected story of humanity was unfolding. A story no one would have believed if it hadn't been lived. Lisa Lotta was only 21 when she first felt the rumble of the American train carrying her through endless miles of open prairie. A German woman in a prisoner transport, she stared out of the barred window at the vast, dry fields rolling past. The war had taken everything she knew: her home, her family, her sense of safety. Now, she and a few other captured women were being sent deep into the heart of the United States, to a prisoner of war camp somewhere in Texas. They expected barbed wire, armed guards, and humiliation. They expected chains. Instead, they found silence, wind, and the sweet, strange smell of hay. When the train stopped, the women stepped out hesitantly into the blinding light. There were men waiting, but not soldiers with rifles. They wore wide-brimmed hats, dusty boots, and easy smiles. Cowboys. Real ones. They stood beside horses, not trucks or cages, their spurs glinting in the sun. For a moment, Lisa thought it must be some mistake. She clutched the strap of her worn satchel tighter, waiting for an order shouted in English she could not understand. But no one shouted. One of the men tipped his hat, said something soft and polite, and gestured toward the horses. Lisa looked around, uncertain. Then she realized they wanted her to ride. The women exchanged stunned glances. Prisoners didn't ride horses. Prisoners were marched. They were chained. Yet here, in the middle of Texas, the rules of war seemed to have dissolved into the heat. Lisa touched the coarse mane of the nearest horse and felt its muscles move under her hand. The cowboy holding the reins smiled at her, a quick, unguarded smile that said, "You're safe here." For the first time in months, she believed it might be true. They rode slowly toward the camp, not behind barbed wire fences, but along open fields dotted with mesquite and oak. The sky stretched wide and blue above them, larger than anything Lisa had ever seen in Europe. She felt the wind against her face, hot and alive, and something in her chest loosened. It was as if Texas itself was breathing for her. The camp wasn't what she had imagined. It wasn't even much of a camp, more like a collection of wooden barracks near a ranch, surrounded by pastures and cattle fences instead of guard towers. The men working there waved as the new arrivals approached. Some wore military uniforms, others denim shirts. They didn't look like enemies. They looked like farmhands who happened to have a war dropped on their doorstep. Inside, the prisoners were given beds with real mattresses, meals of beans and cornbread, and work assignments that involved tending gardens or helping with livestock. It was hard labor, but honest, open, and strangely kind. There were rules, yes, and discipline, but there was also respect. Lisa had been told that Americans hated Germans. Yet every day she found small gestures that contradicted everything she'd been taught. The cook saved extra coffee for her group. A ranch hand taught her to lasso a calf just for fun. At night, she would sit outside her barrack and watch the stars shimmer over the plains, listening to coyotes in the distance, wondering how a land so vast could hold such quiet. The war felt far away here. The camp's commander, an older Texan with silver hair and a slow drawl, treated the prisoners not as criminals, but as people who had simply been caught up in something monstrous. "War makes fools of us all," he once said, when Lisa's friend accidentally spilled a bucket of milk during her shift. He helped clean it up himself, laughing as if it were nothing. That moment stayed with her forever. Over time, the boundaries between guard and prisoner began to blur. The women worked alongside local ranchers, sometimes sharing songs or stories, often communicating more with gestures than words. When a horse went lame, Lisa was the one who noticed it first. She'd grown up around animals, and the cowboys began to respect her for her skill. Soon she was helping train colts, her laughter echoing through the corral like it belonged there. Every night she thought about Germany, the rubble, the hunger, the brothers she hadn't heard from since 1942. But here in Texas, something fragile was taking root inside her. Trust. She didn't know what to call it yet. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was close. Months passed. Seasons changed. Letters arrived, censored, delayed, but precious. And then one morning, a young soldier rode up with a telegram. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. The camp fell silent. No one celebrated. Even the Americans seemed thoughtful, subdued. The German women gathered together, tears slipping down their cheeks. Freedom was coming, but what kind of freedom waited for them back home? That night, Lisa sat outside again, staring at the horizon. The cowboys had lit a bonfire, and music drifted through the warm air. She watched them dance, their boots stirring dust in the firelight. One of them saw her watching and waved her over. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she walked closer. Someone handed her a cup of sweet tea. Someone else laughed and tried to teach her a few steps. And under that endless Texas sky, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the war. The simple, unbelievable weight of being human. The sun rose over the plains the next morning, spilling gold across the fields. Dew shimmered on the grass, and the faint smell of coffee drifted from the mess hall. The war might have been over, but life at the ranch went on, feeding horses, mending fences, tending the cattle. Lisa woke early, like always. Habit, discipline. But now, something was different. The guards didn't shout. The camp gates stood open. Technically, she was still a prisoner, but everyone knew it no longer mattered. The war was finished. The uniforms, the flags, the fear, all of it felt suddenly small under that huge, forgiving sky. Frank Callahan, the ranch owner, came riding up on his old bay horse. He was the kind of man who never seemed hurried, no matter the hour. His hat shadowed his face, but his eyes were sharp, kind, and endlessly patient. "Morning, Miss Lisa," he said, tipping his hat. She smiled, still shy around English, and replied in her soft accent, "Good morning, Mr. Callahan." He pointed toward the barn. "Storm last night busted one of the gates. Think you can help fix it?" Lisa nodded eagerly. Work meant purpose. Work meant normalcy. As they walked together toward the corral, Frank spoke without looking at her. "You'll be going home soon. Army'll send transport trucks next week." Home. The word landed heavy. Lisa didn't know what that meant anymore. Germany wasn't a place in her mind now. It was a memory, a shadow. "Home," she repeated quietly. "I am not sure where that is." Frank looked at her for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said, "home's just the place where somebody treated you right." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The simplicity of it stung her more than she expected. They worked all morning repairing the gate. The sun climbed higher, burning through the cool morning air. Sweat rolled down her neck, but she didn't mind. When the job was done, Frank handed her a canteen. "Ain't bad for a radio operator," he teased. She laughed, a clear, light sound that startled them both. "In the war," she said, "they taught us how to break things, not fix them." Frank nodded, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. "Reckon it's time folks learned the other way round." Later that evening, as the sky turned purple and the crickets began their song, the women gathered by the fire again. Someone strummed a guitar, an old cowboy tune about lost love and rain that never came. Lisa didn't know the words, but the melody was tender and familiar in its sadness. One of the other women, Anna, began humming Lili Marleen, that haunting song every German soldier knew. The Americans recognized it too. A few joined in softly, their deep voices blending with the women's. For a moment, there were no sides, no nations, just people, tired, hopeful, and human. When the song ended, silence lingered. Then Frank spoke quietly from where he sat, polishing his boots. "You know," he said, "war ends faster when people stop acting like enemies." Lisa looked into the firelight. She didn't know if peace would ever come to her country. But sitting there under the vast Texas night, surrounded by warmth instead of fear, she started to believe it could begin, at least here. The next morning, trucks arrived from the army base. The women were told to pack their things, what little they had. Letters, a pair of gloves, maybe a keepsake carved from scrap wood. Lisa folded her work shirt carefully, the one she'd worn every day on the ranch. It smelled faintly of smoke and hay. When she stepped outside, the men were waiting. The ranch hands stood beside their horses, hats in hand. None of them smiled this time. Frank approached her last. "Got something for you," he said, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. She took it carefully, unwrapping the twine. Inside was a cream-colored Stetson hat, new and soft, the brim curved perfectly. "So you don't forget Texas," he said. Lisa's throat tightened. "I will not," she whispered. "Never." The men cheered as she tried it on. It was too big, and she laughed through her tears. Someone shouted, "Yeehaw! The German cowgirl rides again." The moment was brief, but it burned bright in her memory. When she climbed into the truck, she looked back through the slats and saw them still waving, the ranch fading behind a haze of dust and sunlight. As the miles rolled away, Lisa pressed her hand to the brim of her hat. She thought about how strange it was to find kindness in captivity, freedom in obedience, peace in a foreign land. The ship home was crowded, slow, and silent. The Atlantic stretched endless and gray. When they finally docked in Bremerhaven, winter had already set in. Germany was broken. Smoke still hung over cities that had no roofs left. Lisa stepped ashore with her bag, her hat tucked safely inside. The American officers handed out care packages, tins of food, chocolate bars, a few blankets. On each box, she saw the Red Cross of the U.S. Army. For years, she'd been told Americans were monsters, but now she knew better. The true monsters were lies, the kind that fed hate and swallowed hope whole. When she reached her hometown, there was almost nothing left. Her parents were gone. Her house was gone. The sky seemed smaller somehow, the air heavy with ash and silence. But even then, she carried Texas inside her. She began helping Allied officers as a translator. Her English, learned from cowboys and laughter, was rough but lively. She'd call officers partner without thinking, or drop an occasional ain't, and they'd chuckle. When people asked where she'd learned it, she'd smile and say, "From the men who showed me what decency sounds like." In 1948, she was invited to speak at a women's conference in Stuttgart. The theme was rebuilding through understanding. Standing on the small stage, Lisa's voice trembled at first. "I was a prisoner," she began, "but I was never treated like one." She told them about the ranch, about the horses, about the night they sang under the stars, about how the men who had every right to hate them chose instead to show kindness. "I learned," she said softly, "that freedom does not come from victory. It comes from dignity, from mercy, from the courage to be kind." When she finished, the hall was silent. Then an American woman, a nurse, walked up and hugged her. And just like that, two former enemies wept together in front of everyone. Years later, Lisa returned to America for good. She settled in San Antonio, Texas, not far from the fields where she'd once worked as a prisoner. She opened a small bakery on the corner of a quiet street. The sign above the door read Lotta's House. Inside, the air always smelled of cinnamon and coffee. On the wall behind the counter hung a single framed photograph. A young woman wearing a cowboy hat too large for her head, standing beside a tall rancher with a shy smile. Beneath it, in small letters, was written, "From enemies to friends." When customers asked about it, she would say, "That man, he's the one who taught me what America really is." By the time she passed away in 1987, Lisa Lotta Minhart was known not just as a baker, but as a bridge, living proof that even in the ruins of war, humanity can still bloom. Historians would later say that stories like hers helped shape the friendship between Germany and the United States after the war. Because thousands of former prisoners returned home with tales not of cruelty, but of fairness, of decency, of cowboys who handed them saddles instead of chains. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real victory. Because sometimes the greatest battles are won not with guns, but with grace.